All right, time to get serious. I had to take off the chain so there isn't any negative connotations to what I'm about to talk about. Today's badass woman of Herstory has a question mark at the end, or an asterisk, because it's kind of interesting. All right. Harriet Elizabeth Beecher Stowe, born June 14th, 1811, passed July 1st, 1896. She was an American author and abolitionist. She came from the religious Beecher family and became best known for her novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin, which came out in 1852, which depicts the harsh conditions experienced by enslaved African Americans. Melanated Americans, I guess, is the more. The book reached an audience of millions as a novel and play and became influential in the United States and in Great Britain, energizing anti-slavery forces in the American North while provoking widespread anger in the South. All right, so far she sounds like a badass woman in Herstory. So I don't know why I was questioning. I guess just because the phrase Uncle Tom came from it. But I think that's separate. Stowe wrote 30 books, including novels, 3 travel memoirs, and collections of articles and letters. She was influential both for her writings and for her public stances and debates on social issues of the day. Harriet Elizabeth Beecher was born in Litchfield, Connecticut. She was the 6th of 11 children, born to outspoken Calvinist preacher Lyman Beecher. He was a preacher named Beecher. Her mother was his first wife, Roxana Foote, a deeply religious woman who died when Stowe was only 5 years old. Roxana's maternal grandfather was General Andrew Ward of the Revolutionary War. Harriet's siblings included a sister, Catherine Beecher, who became an educator and author, as well as brothers who became ministers, including Henry Ward Beecher, who became a famous preacher and abolitionist, Charles Beecher, and Edward Beecher. What a name. Harriet enrolled in the Hartford Female Seminary, run by her older sister, Catherine. There she received something girls seldom got, a traditional academic education, with the focus in the classics, languages, and mathematics. Among her classmates was Sarah P. Willis, who later wrote under the pseudonym Fanny Fern. In 1832, at the age of 21, Harriet Beecher moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, to join her father, who had become the president of Lane Theological Seminary. For some reason, Ohio right now, a lot of kids keep looking up Ohio school. I think it's because that meme that, or there's like a whack rap song when he's just saying Ohio. There she also joined the Semicolon Club, a literary salon and social club whose members included the Beecher sisters, Caroline Lee Hentz, Salmon P. Chase, future governor of Ohio and Secretary of the Treasury under President Lincoln, Emily Blackwell, and others. Cincinnati's trade and shipping business on the Ohio River was booming, drawing numerous migrants from different parts of the country, including many escaped slaves, bounty hunters seeking them, and Irish immigrants who worked on the state's canals and railroads. In 1829, the ethnic Irish attacked blacks, wrecking areas of the city, melanatives, tried to push out these competitors for jobs. Beecher met a number of melanated people who had suffered in those attacks, and their experience contributed to her later writing about slavery. Riots took place again in 1836 and 1841, driven also by native-born anti-abolitionists. Harriet was also influenced in the Lane debates on slavery, the biggest event ever to take place at Lane. It was the series of debates held on 18 days in February of 1834 between colonization and abolition defenders, decisively won by Theodore Weld and other abolitionists. Elizabeth attended most of the debates. Her father and the trustees, afraid of more violence from anti-abolitionist whites, prohibited any further discussions of the topic. The result was a mass exodus of the Lane students, together with a supportive trustee and a professor who moved as a group to the new Oberlin Collegiate Institute, and after its trustees agreed, by a close and acrimonious vote to accept students regardless of race and to allow discussions of any topic. Yes, America. It was in the literary club at Lane that she met Reverend Calvin Ellis Stowe, a widower who was a professor of biblical literature at the seminary. The two married at the seminary on January 6, 1836. The Stowes had 7 kids together, including twin daughters. So, let's go into Uncle Tom's Cabin, the book she wrote that was very famous, and the Civil War. In 1850, Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Law, prohibiting assistance to fugitives and strengthening sanctions even in free states. At the time, Stowe had moved with her family to Brunswick, Maine, where her husband was now teaching at Bowdoin College. Their home near the campus is protected as a National Historic Landmark. The Stowes were ardent critics of slavery and supported the Underground Railroad, temporarily housing several fugitive slaves in their home. One fugitive from slavery, John Andrew Jackson, wow, I wonder if he was the son of one of the many children of Andrew Jackson, wrote of hiding with Stowe in her house in Brunswick as he fled to Canada in his narrative titled The Experience of a Slave in South Carolina, which was published in 1862. Stowe claimed to have a vision of a dying slave during a communion service at Brunswick's First Parish Church, which inspired her to write his story. However, what more likely allowed her to empathize with slaves was the loss of her 18-month-old son, Samuel Charles Stowe. She even stated the following: "Having experienced losing someone so close to me, I can sympathize with all the poor, powerless slaves at the unjust auctions. You will always be in my heart, Samuel Charles Stowe." On March 9, 1850, Stowe wrote to Gamaliel Bailey, editor of the weekly anti-slavery journal, The National Era, that she planned to write a story about the problem of slavery. "I feel now that the time has come when even a woman or a child who can speak a word for freedom and humanity is bound to speak. I hope every woman who can write will not be silent." Shortly after, in June 1851, when she was 40, the first installment of Uncle Tom's Cabin was published in serial form in the newspaper, The National Era. She originally used the subtitle, The Man That Was a Thing, but it was soon changed to Life Among the Lowly. Installments were published weekly from June 5, 1851 to April 1, 1852. For the newspaper serialization of her novel, Stowe was paid $400. Uncle Tom's Cabin was published in book form on March 20, 1852 by John P. Jewett with an initial print run of 5,000 copies. Each of its 2 volumes included 3 illustrations and a title page designed by Hammett Billings. In less than a year, the book sold an unprecedented 300,000 copies. By December, as sales began to wane, Jewett issued an inexpensive edition at 37.5 cents each to stimulate sales. Sales abroad, as in Britain, where the book was a great success, earned Stowe nothing, as there were no international copyright agreement in place during that era. In late 1853, Stowe undertook a lecture tour of Britain, and to make up the royalties that she could now receive there, the Glasgow New Association for the Abolition of Slavery set up Uncle Tom's Offering. According to Daniel R. Valero, the goal of the book was to educate Northerners on the realistic horrors of the things that were happening in the South. The other purpose was to try to make people in the South feel more empathetic towards the people that they were forcing into slavery. The book's emotional portrayal of the effects of slavery on individuals carried the nation's attention. Stowe showed that slavery touched all of society, beyond the people directly involved as masters, traders, and slaves. Her novel added to the debate about abolition and slavery and aroused opposition in the South. In the South, Stowe was depicted as out of touch, arrogant, and guilty of slander. I'm sure some people in the South liked her, though. Within a year, 300 babies in Boston alone were named Eva, one of the book's characters, and a play based on the book opened in New York in November. Southerners quickly responded with numerous works of what are now called anti-Tom novels, seeking to portray Southern society and slavery in more positive terms. Many of these were bestsellers, although none matched the popularity of Stowe's work, which set publishing records. Bro, that's crazy that they made anti-Tom novels. After the start of the Civil War, Stowe traveled to the capital, Washington, D.C., where she met President Abraham Lincoln on November 25th of 1862. Stowe's daughter, Hattie, reported it was a very droll time that we had at the White House, I assure you. I will only say now that it was all very funny, and we were ready to explode with laughter all the while. What Lincoln said is a minor mystery. Her son later reported that Lincoln greeted her by saying, "So you are the little woman who wrote that book that started this great war." Her own accounts are vague, including the letter reporting the meeting to her husband. "I had a real funny interview with the president." Later years. Stowe purchased property near Jacksonville, Florida. In response to a newspaper article in 1873, she wrote, "I came to Florida the year after the war and held property in Duval County ever since." Shout out to Lil Duval. "And all this time, I have not received even an incivility from any native Floridian." Stowe is controversial for her support of Elizabeth Campbell, Duchess of Argyll, whose father-in-law decades before was a leader in the Highland clearances, the transformation of the remote Highlands of Scotland from a militia-based society to an agricultural one that supported far fewer people. The newly homeless moved to Canada, where very bitter accounts appeared. It was Stowe's assignment to refute them using evidence the Duchess provided in letter XV11, which is 17, volume 1 of her letter 17, volume 1 of her travel memoir, Sunny Memories of Foreign Lands. Stowe was criticized for her seeming defense of the clearances. That's why I was saying, because I read that part. But it seems like once you get a certain level of fame, back then or now, even if it was with a positive thing, you know, they start to flip you. I'm sure she got a lot of money for that, helping out the Duchess. In 1868, Stowe became one of the first editors of Hearth and Home magazine, one of several new publications appealing to women. She departed after a year. Stowe campaigned for the expansion of married women's rights, arguing in 1869 that the position of a married woman is in many respects precisely similar to that of the slave. I'm not going to say what she actually said. She can make no contract and hold no property. Yeah, her comparing women to slaves, it's kind of crazy. I mean, I guess whatever. Let's keep reading. Whatever she inherits or earns becomes at that moment the property of her husband. Though he acquired a fortune through her, or though she earned a fortune through her talents, he is the sole master of it, and she cannot draw a penny. In the English common law, a married woman is nothing at all. No, she's dropping bars. She passes out of legal existence. He is the sole master of it, and she cannot draw a penny. Oh, I already read it. In the 1870s, Stowe's brother Henry Ward Beecher was accused of adultery and became the subject of a national scandal. Unable to bear the public attacks on her brother, Stowe again fled to Florida, but asked family members to send her newspaper reports. Through the affair, she remained loyal to her brother and believed he was innocent. Interesting. After her return to Connecticut, Mrs. Stowe was among the founders of the Hartfield Art School, which later became part of the University of Hartford. Following the death of her husband, Calvin Stowe, in 1886, Harriet started rapidly to decline in health. By 1888, the Washington Post reported that as a result of dementia, the 77-year-old Stowe started writing Uncle Tom's Cabin over again. She imagined that she was engaged in the original composition, and for several hours every day, she industrially used pen and paper, inscribing passages of the book almost exactly word for word. This was done unconsciously from memory, the author imagining that she composed the matter as she went along. To her diseased mind, the story was brand new, and she frequently exhausted herself with labor, which she regarded as freshly created. Sad. Mark Twain, a neighbor of Stowe's in Hartfield, recalled her last years in the following passage of his autobiography. Her mind was decayed, and she was a pathetic figure. She wandered about all day long in the care of a muscular Irish woman. Among the colonists of our neighborhood, the doors always stood open in pleasant weather. Mrs. Stowe entered them at her own free will, and as she was always softly slippered and generally full of animal spirits, she was able to deal in surprises, and she liked to do it. She would slip up behind a person who was deep in dreams and musings and fetch a war whoop that would jump the person out of his clothes. And she had other moods. Sometimes we would hear gentle music in the drawing room and would find her there at the piano singing ancient and melancholy songs with infinitely touching effect. Whoa. Modern researchers now speculate that at the end of her life, she was suffering from Alzheimer's disease. She passed July 1st, 1896 in Hartford, Connecticut, 17 days after her 85th birthday. She's buried in the historic cemetery at Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts, along with her husband and their son, Henry Ellis. In 1986, Stowe was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame. On June 13, 2007, the USPS issued a 75-cent Distinguished American Series postage stamp in her honor. Stowe State University in St. Louis, Missouri is named for Stowe and William Torrey Harris. In 2010, Stowe was proposed by the Ohio Historical Society as a finalist in a statewide vote for inclusion in Statuary Hall at the United States Capitol. But Thomas Edison was chosen instead. Thomas Edison. Alright. I definitely got to drink something after reading all that. Try to bust the flow. Alright, y'all got to wrap this baby up. You got things.